So early in the book, you raised the question that I think you highlight as a very important question. If you could go back in time, would you kill baby Hitler? This is somehow a defining question. Can you explain?
Well, it's about whether you think that people are born evil. And so the question of would you kill baby Hitler is sort of meant to be something that gets people chatting about whether or not they think that people are born with the traits that make them capable of extreme harm towards others, or whether they think it's socialized, whether it's something that maybe in how people are raised is sort of manifests over time. And with Hitler, we know from certainly psychologists who have pored over his traits over time and looked at who he was over the course of his life, there's always this question of sort of, was he mad or bad? And with the answer to was he mad, well, he certainly had some characteristics that people would associate with, for example, maybe sadism, with this idea that he was less high on empathy is probably also showcased in his work. But in terms of whether he was born that way, I think the answer usually would be no. And actually, in his early life, he didn't showcase quite a lot of the traits that later he sort of defined the horrors that he was capable of. So would I go back in time and kill baby Hitler? The answer is no, because I don't think it's a straight line from baby to adult, and I don't think people are born evil.
So you think a large part of it is nurture versus nature, the environment shaping the person to manifest the evil that they bring out to the world.
Well, and I would be careful with using the word evil because I think we shouldn't use it to describe human beings because it most commonly others people. It, in fact, I think makes us capable of perpetrating horrendous crimes against those we label evil. So for me, that word it's the end of a conversation. It's when we call somebody evil, we say, this person is so different from me that I don't even need to bother trying to understand why they are capable of doing terrible things because I would never do such things. I am good. And so that artificial differentiation between good and evil is something that certainly with the book I'm trying to dismantle. And that's why introducing continuums for different kinds of negative traits is really important, and introducing this idea that there's nothing fundamental to people that makes them capable of great harm. We all have the capacity to kill people and murder people and do other terrible things. The question is why we don't do those things rather than why we do those things quite often. So I think humanizing and understanding that we all have these traits is the most important thing in my book, certainly.
Yeah, I think a prerequisite of doing evil, I see this in war a lot, is to dehumanize the other. In order to be able to murder them at scale, you have to reformulate the war as a fight between good and evil. And the interesting thing you see with war is both sides think that it's the battle of good versus evil. It almost always is like that, especially at large-scale wars.
That's right. And on top of dehumanization, there's also this other thing called de-individuation, which is where you see yourself as part of the group and you no longer see yourself as an individual. And so it's this fight of us versus them. And so you need both of those things. You need that sort of collapse of empathy for other people, the people who are on the other side. And you need this idea that you can be swallowed by the group. And that gives you a sense of also the cloak of justice, the cloak of morality, even when, maybe you're on the wrong side. And that's where, getting into sort of who's on the right side of each war is always a more complicated issue. But certainly calling other people evil and calling the other side evil and dehumanizing them is crucial to most of these kinds of fights.
Yeah, you promote empathy as an important thing to do when we're trying to understand each other. And then a lot of people are uncomfortable with empathy when it comes to folks that we traditionally label as evil. Hitler's an example. To have empathy means that you're somehow dirtying yourself by the evil. What's your case for empathy? Even when we're talking about some of the darker humans in human history.
My case for empathy, or evil empathy, as I sometimes call it, so empathy for people who we often call evil. Also, the title of my book is Evil, or in the UK market, it's Making Evil, which is a reference to a Nietzsche quote, which is thinking evil is making evil. The idea being that evil is a label we place onto others. There's nothing inherent to anything that makes it evil. And so I also think that we need to, well, dismantle that and empathize with people we call evil, because if we're saying that this is the worst kind of act or worst kind of manifestation of what somebody can be, So if someone can destroy others, torture others, hurt others, I work as a criminal psychologist, so I work a lot on sexual abuse cases, on rape cases, on murder trials. And so in those contexts, that word evil is used all the time to go, this person is evil. And if we're doing that, then we need to go, okay, but what we actually want is we don't really just want to label people. We want to stop that behavior from happening. And the only way we're going to do that is if we understand what led that person to come to that situation and to engage in that behavior. And so that's why evil empathy, I think, is crucial, because ultimately what we want is to make society safer. And the only way we can do that is to understand the psychological and social levers that led them to engage in this behavior in the first place.
So, on a small tangent, I get to interview a bunch of folks that a large number of people consider evil. So, how would you give advice about how to conduct such interviews when you're sitting in front of a world leader that some millions of people consider evil? Or if you're sitting in front of people that are actual, convicted criminals? What's the way to conduct that interview? Because to me, I want to understand that human being. They also have their own narrative about why they're good and why they're misunderstood. And they have a story in which they're not evil. And they're going to try to tell that story. And some of them are exceptionally good at telling that story. So if it's for public consumption, how would you do that interview?
I think it's important to speak with people whom a lot of people dehumanize, including myself. I mean, I also speak with people who I think are or I know have committed terrible crimes. And I have spoken to these people because as a criminal psychologist, that's often part of my job. So what's interesting, I think, when you're speaking to people who have committed really terrible crimes, or certainly who've been convicted of terrible crimes, is that not only is it potentially insightful because they might give you a real answer and not just a controlled narrative about why they committed these crimes. If they are either maintaining their innocence or they're more reluctant to do that, I think even the narrative that they are controlling, that they're being very careful with, still tells us a lot about them. So I think certainly in my research on environmental crime as well, what we see is that people use a lot of rationalization and they say things like, well, everybody's doing it. And if I hadn't done this first, somebody else would have done this waste crime or this other kind of crime. And so there's this rationalization, there's this normalization, there's this diminishing of your own role and agency. And that still tells us a lot about the psychology of people who commit crimes, because most of us are very bad at saying sorry and saying, I messed this up and I shouldn't have done that. And instead, what our brains do is they try to make us feel better. And they go, no, you're still a good person, despite this one thing. And so we try to rationalize it and we try to excuse it. We try to explain it. And there is some truth to it as well, because we know the reasons why we engage in that behavior and other people don't have the whole context. So we also do have more of the whole story. But on the other hand, we need to also face the fact that sometimes we do terrible things and we need to stop doing those terrible things and prevent other people from doing the same.